Europe faces another day of reckoning this Sunday. Italians voting whether or not to reform their post-war constitution. Polls favored the no, but as of last week, 1/4 of them still were undecided. We've come to know that in any referendum, you're never sure what questions citizens will answer. In this case, Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has backed off on making the vote about his own person, but a loss could nonetheless further boost insurgent parties like the eurosceptic Five-Star Movement and perhaps spell political doom for Renzi, the only remaining poster child for Europe's center-left. And if neighboring Austria the same day decides to elect Western Europe's first far-right head of state since Hitler, how should the rest of the EU react on Monday morning? After Brexit, Trump, is this the new normal? Ahead of big elections, by the way, coming up in the Netherlands and in France early next year. Today in the FOURQUET debate, we're looking at Europe's next worry. With us from Rome, he's an economic advisor to the Italian Prime Minister, member of the European Parliament from the Democratic Party, Joram Gutgeld. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening.
From Brussels, Ignazio Corrao, member of the European Parliament for the insurgent Five-Star Movement. Thank you for joining us. Economist Francesco Saracino of the French OFCE think tank is with us here in the studio. And he's a man who's been looking at Italian democracy since 1943 in his studies. Frédéric Attal, who teaches history at Valenciennes University, that's in the north of France. Thanks for being with us. The FOURQUET debate on Facebook and Twitter, the hashtag F24debate. Before it was a referendum, it was a bill that followed the long and tortuous path of many a piece of legislation in Italy, 2 years back and forth between the two chambers of parliament until April. Frédéric Attal, I was reviewing this, and we have a bloated legislature in France. But Italy has 945 lawmakers, with both the Senate and the lower house. Reducing the Senate seats by 2/3 is just one of the pieces. Just spell out for us what else is in this referendum.
Well, basically, the referendum is to get rid of the twin chambers constitutional system.
Because the lower and upper house do exactly the same thing.
But not only the laws voted by the Senate and the chamber, but the government has to call to the confidence of both chambers. So when you can have the approbation of the chamber, the deputy chamber, and then you have to call the confidence of the Senate. And maybe the two chambers are not on the same of the same advice. So one government could be repealed by the Senate or the chamber. But with the new system, the Senate doesn't have the possibility of repealing the government. And so I think it's a way to simplify the constitutional system, to reduce the risks for the government, and to stabilize the political situation of Italy.
Joram Gutgeld, does Italy's system need stabilizing? You've had a pretty stable government since 2013.
Well, Italy has had, over the last 70 years, 63 governments. And the problem, which was just mentioned, is that the two houses have different electoral laws and also different electoral base. You can vote to the Senate only if you're above 25 years old, whereas you vote to the lower house at 18. Which creates a situation whereby inevitably the two houses have different majorities. That makes it very difficult for any government to take forward decisive moves, to agree with the citizens, with the voters on a program and carry it forward. Therefore, this is a fundamental change to ensure that Italy, that needs major structural reforms, will continue doing those reforms in years to come.
But the criticism leveled at the government is that it concentrates too much power in the hands of the prime minister.
It doesn't at all. The constitutional reform does not change the powers of the prime minister. And mind you, the prime minister in Italy has less powers than in other countries. For instance, he does not nominate and he cannot fire the ministers. They are nominated and can be fired by the president of the republic. So, and none of that has changed. So the accusations of changing the powers of prime ministers are simply not based on facts.
Francesco Saracino, you for or against this constitutional reform?
Well, I'm a private citizen, so my opinion counts. I mean, I'm not an expert on constitutional law. I believe that this reform is not going to be fundamental for the Italian political system. Italy has had many governments, 60 and something in 70 years, not because of its institutions. It's because of its political fragmentation. And that political fragmentation is not going to disappear only because you change the rules of the game. We have a problem here. The problem is that populism, even if I don't like to use that word in a negative accession, is on the rise. We'll see later. We have a member of the Five-Star Movement who's going to join us. And this is not something you can stop simply by tampering with the rules of the game.
But do you agree? But hang on a sec, Francesco. This idea of two chambers that do exactly the same thing, Italy's unique in that respect.
Italy is maybe unique.
Do you need that?
Italy also has a long history of men of the providence, and so it has built in its own system since the 40s a sort of heavy checks and balances that prevent a single man who happens to come to the power to do whatever he or she wants. We had a few of them, and I always ask the question, what would have happened with Berlusconi in power and the institutions we are going to vote? The Italian system more or less survived Berlusconi thanks to its institutions. So I do believe that this is not a big obstacle to the approval of laws. Actually, lots of people say that Italy, like France, has too many laws, not too few. And it's not a solution to the problem of political fragmentation of our system, which is huge, and it's not going to disappear on December 5th.
Ignazio Corrao, do you agree?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this last point that was raised. Italy is not a problem of having few laws. Italy has got a lot of laws, and whenever there is the political intentions to make a law pass, they always found a way to make them pass. So the system of the two chambers, the perfect bicameralism that we're talking about, was not the problem that on having laws in Italy, because Italy has got many laws. Italy has got laws whenever there is the political intention to have those laws. So we can make lots of examples. The problem of this reform is not. I mean, this
so
reform
you like the system where you have you like the
citizens.
system where you have 315 senators.
I'm not, we're not talking about that. The problem of Italy is not the number of members of parliament. That is not the highest number in Europe. The problem in Italy may be the cost of the two chambers. And as Five-Star Movement, we present a law that could be easily voted by the majority that did not show in the chamber, by which we could have cut the cost of senators and members of the chamber of half, like we do as Five-Star Movement. So if we talk about cost of the chambers, we didn't need a constitutional reform. But the message that Prime Minister Renzi is spreading to even his campaign is about the cost of politics and the reduction of senators. But the problem of this reform is that actually it involves 47 articles of the Constitution, it's more than 1/3, and changes the check and balance between institutions. So it's not about the reduction of number of senators, it's not about the reduction of cost of politics that could be easily done by a regular law if there was the political will of doing so.
Let me begin Yoram Gutgeld on that point.
During the years.
Yoram Gutgeld, your reaction.
Yeah,
I'll give you some specific examples. We have a competition law, a very important competition law that is sitting in Senate as of a year. We have a very important, actually two important reforms of the justice system, civil justice and penal justice, that are sitting in the Senate, and we can't pass them through because the majority of the Senate is not strong enough. So the fact that we have different majorities in the two houses is an absolute detriment to making incisive reforms. This is why Italy, that needs incisive, strong reforms to correct major structural problems over the last 40 years that have been accumulated over the last 40 years, need a decisive political making system, which is what we don't have right now. And the reform will fix it. In addition, of course, it will reduce the cost of the system and it will simplify a lot of things. But the fundamental issue that we are facing is, on the one hand, the ability to make decisive reforms and to take them forward and pass them through Parliament quickly. And the second thing we need, of course, which is the other important element of the reform, the reform clarifies the responsibilities and the power-making rules between central government and regions. We have given too much power to the region in the past, and we have made the decision-making powers between the regions and center unclear. There's been numerous court. Our constitutional court is employed, I think, half of its time to resolve issues between central government and regions, and that will be cleared again with this reform. These are the two main reasons for the reform.
Let me bring in Frédéric Attal on this. No. Frédéric, when you look at Italy from 1943 until today, what would you say, when you compare to the gridlock, say, here in France, how would you say Italy's doing?
Well, when I'm looking back in 1943 or 1946, because the Constitution was built in 1946, I think the situation was very, very different from now. And, well, let's say that the three parties that built the Constitution no longer exist, do no longer exist. I mean, the Christian democracy does no longer exist, the Communist Party, the Socialist Party. So the only thing resisted in this system is the Constitution. On my point of view, I think it's an old Constitution, maybe a little rusty, and I think, this is my point of view, the reform is going the right way in, in telling the Senate it will be a regional chamber, and I think it's just like Germany, with, well, exactly or more than, no, a little more senators than in Germany, but of course exactly the same in the United States, which is partly a model. I think it will be a fair system and even a balanced one. I don't think there will be a risk of a prime minister too strong, like maybe Francesco said. I don't think it is a risk in Italy now. But maybe he's right, because maybe he's right on the phenomena of populism.
All right, 2 for, 2 against this referendum. We've talked about the nuts and bolts of what's in the actual text that's being voted on Sunday. But as we said at the top, it's all about what people are really voting about. Matteo Renzi had to backpedal after first putting his political future on the line. Will citizens answer the question that's on the ballot? The Prime Minister weighed in on that.
How annoying, you might say. We should be talking about the struggle against unemployment, about the economy. No, we know that there is plenty to do, but the starting point is precisely to change parity bicameralism.
A Five-Star Movement co-leader Beppe Grillo among those precisely talking about the economy at rallies in the build-up to Sunday's vote.
Crisis, crisis, crisis. It's been 10 years. A crisis can last a year, 2 years, 3 years. If it's been 10 years, it's no longer a crisis. It's that the world has changed. Don't you get it? We're in the middle of this, and we too are starting to change the world.
Francesco Saracino, you say you're personally against this reform, but how do you feel about the fact that, well, when it comes time to put paper in the ballot box on Sunday, many people will be voting for other reasons?
To be very sincere, I don't think this is a question. I mean, such a reform with all the technicalities involved. I mean, I've been pretty much following that because of my interests. It's an extremely complicated reform. It's a third of the articles of the Constitution with lots of very difficult choices to be made. You cannot boil down to yes or no. So it should have not been the subject.
So you
of
agree
a
with Matteo
referendum.
Renzi on that one, that this should be all about the reform and not about the economic crisis? Or
Which means that calling a referendum was necessary because there was not the necessary consensus on the reform in the parliament. So you cannot imagine that you substitute I mean, we are talking about populism. Calling the referendum was populism in the very first place because that was an attempt to have a sort of...
It was mandated by law.
No, not all reforms need to be approved. I mean, you need to have a request for the referendum to be approved by a number of regions or by members of
if you're
parliament.
saying 1/3 of the Constitution is being changed, it's pretty obvious you needed a referendum.
If the Constitution, because I don't want to I'm sorry, just as a matter of fact, in Italy, any constitutional change that does not have 2/3 of parliament voting for it needs to go through referendum to be approved. That's the law.
And that's why you shouldn't have a majority voting for a constitutional reform, because you cannot ask the people to go into the technicalities of such a complex reform. So you need to find the 2/3 consensus to avoid that. That was the point I was making. So the point is, it was bound to be transformed into a referendum on the action of the government because it's too hard to ask these questions to the people.
All right, when we come back...
Which doesn't mean it's a good thing, by the way.
We're going to look at the consequences of the outcome when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.